And our presenter for the next topic will be Wade. We're going to go through our emergency procedures. Wade is just awesome. He does so good at this stuff. And as skydive school instructor, PFF instructor, tandem instructor, amongst many other things as well. Not only is he going to talk about the emergencies, I am going to post in the chat. My next little slide here is, if you haven't watched these, they are amazing videos that talk through low speed and high speed malfunctions and also decision-making process. So I will copy these over into the chat as well. But I will for now pass this. Oh, and then after that, after Wade does that, we are going to go into a little kind of more open conversation, a little bit. And there will be a video, and I will talk about that before we launch the video. So Wade, without further delay, we are on to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so emergency procedures. I'm just kind of taking the same thing from last year, so I didn't do anything super fancy. I do apologize, and following Danny is a little challenging when you don't have any visuals, but basically it comes down to stress preparation. So that kind of comes down to your preparation of each jump. So kind of touching on the same points that we've been going on throughout this entire talk. The more preparation you do, the less decision making you will have to make in the moment. So it really comes down to a procedural approach. And this is especially important in emergency situations that we deal with in our sport. So obviously, like, environmental checks are going to make you feel a little bit better if you do those before your jump, gear checks, all those things, just to make sure that you're familiar and you know all the steps of the procedure and all the things that you are going to do. So, just touching on the same things, your DZ briefing, personal review every day of your environment. So making sure you understand the winds, making sure you understand the landing area, making sure you understand the other hazards or the environmental situations that can change. And then jump run is a big one too. Just making sure you understand which way jump run is. And then obviously moving into the same thing I was talking about, like gear checks. So at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day or after every jump, and just making sure that your gear is still suitable to use. And understanding all the components of your gear, obviously, and how to use it, and making sure you're using it right. So, like handles checks, obviously, but practicing them, like, what do you say it? Instead of practice makes perfect, practice perfectly. Just making sure that you're doing those not only on the ground, but in the plane and right before you exit. So practicing those EPs, you want to practice them often. And there's two different types. You've got mental handle practice or mental rehearsal, and then you've got actual physical rehearsal practices. At the beginning of the season, it's important to make sure that you actually are practicing these with physical aspects, like using your hands, touching your handles, and also like looking to make sure that you're not going to be grabbing onto your clothing or grabbing onto your webbing or any other areas, just to make sure that you are practicing it perfectly. And then the other thing too is to remember, like, stress awareness during all aspects of the jump. I believe in the PIMS, they call it reducing arousal, I think is the word that they use in the PIMS, or they used to. I always like that. It always made me laugh. Yeah, so, in the aircraft, one thing that I think Pete mentioned a few times, and I think Danny touched on it too, is like, trying to stay awake and pay attention to where you are in the aircraft. And that's something that, as a working skydiver is a very challenging thing on your like 10th jump, or even at a boogie when you're doing like 10 or 12 jumps. So just make sure to be aware on every jump that you should be you should be aware of where you are, the hazards that are around you, your altitude, whether your seatbelt is on or off. Just making sure that you're not just using that time as downtime. And then same thing in free fall, your altitude awareness is huge, obviously. And in canopy, or in your canopy situations, you also want to kind of move into the same 3 words that we're going to go over in a second here, breaking it down into recognizing, assessing, and acting when we're going to be making these decisions. Yeah, so like basically just stressing this awareness during all aspects of the jump. So aircraft, free fall, canopy, landing, and in all of this, you know, with your preparation, you will, if you've made sure that you understand the risks at hand, you will have a better grasp, and you'll also have better procedures memorized, which will obviously help you in the case of an emergency. One thing we're going to talk about here is, you know, to do with altitude awareness before we go into a couple other things here. And what is your hard deck, or where is your limit as to the altitude, the lowest altitude you feel comfortable pulling your hacky sack or your free flight tab or your main parachute. So the CSBA in basic safety rules has 3 recommendations, and just the key here to remember is that these are recommendations or rules, but they are minimums. This is not like where you should really start your process is thinking like, okay, I have my A license for my solo, I'm at $3,000, or I've got my B, I can go down to 25, or you know, I'm a tandem master, and so 45 is it. That's where we go. That is like the minimum requirements of where we need to have a parachute activated and open and above our head. So it's important to take that into consideration. And then also, you know, when you're thinking about your personal hard deck, thinking about the amount of jumps you have this season, how current you are, the amount of jumps you have in total, the gear that you have now, has it changed? Do you have a new canopy that you're trying out? Is this a new area? So, you know, like, it's a really important question that you should ask yourself, and you should continue asking yourself to make sure that you're still comfortable with your hard deck, and then making sure that you honor that in your decision making as well. Yeah, and then this is where I was going to go to the video, but we didn't really plan that. Do you want to do the video now, or do you want to switch back and do it at the end? It doesn't really matter to me.
Whatever fits the conversation better. You want me to put it up now?
Yeah, sure. Throw it up now.
Okay. So before I put this video up, I just want to advise everybody on here. This is a very graphic video. It is obviously a real skydive, a real incident. So it might be very disturbing to people on this call. If you do not want to watch a video that could disturb you from a skydive perspective, I just ask you to maybe walk away from your computer. It's about less than 1 minute and 30 seconds long. Otherwise, yeah, I'm just gonna play it, and bear with me while I get to share that. It might take me a second here. I hope internet wise it all works out well. This is where it sometimes might not. Can everyone see that okay so far? All right, here we go. Sorry, just let me stop that video. All right, take a moment. Everybody saw the video, I'm assuming, that could see it. Deep breath, breathe out. Wade, I am gonna let you take over from there.
Okay, so yeah, the reason that it's good to understand and know where your hard deck is, and also be aware of where you're at in that skydive, is because situations like this can be avoided if we, one, know where that hard deck is, are aware in our skydive, and also honor that hard deck so that we make sure that we're following through with it. So like drawing a comparison, like we were talking about before, if you compare like skydiving with like a major first aid or a car crash or a building evacuation, if you have a procedural approach, you won't really need to adapt very much, and you won't need to use as much judgment in the situation. However, there is still some, obviously, times where you're going to have to use some judgment. But in a situation like this, if we are to be aware of where our hard deck is and that we are infringing on it very, very quickly, it's easy for us to remember, okay, well, I'm not going to mess around with this parachute anymore. I'm going to cut away. Okay. So the 3 words that we kind of go into are actually, kind of 4, or assess. So recognize, assess, and act are the 3 ones that we're going to kind of go over, in correlation with our emergency procedures. One, we need to recognize the canopy. So we need to know if it's a good canopy, or recognize that it's out, assess the situation, make sure that it is a good canopy, and then act on it. So one, we're going to recognize our altitude and our awareness and remember where our hard deck is. We're going to identify if there's a problem and what a good canopy looks like. And so you're going to do your canopy control, your visual inspection before you do your hands-on inspection. So your visual inspection is it there? Is it square? Is it full of air? Are the lines straight, sliders down, and are you flying straight? And if that's all good, then we're going to do our physical check, which is our canopy control check, where we pull down on our toggles and we check to make sure that we flare and we can control the canopy with a right-hand turn, a left-hand turn, and another flare. And then if that's all fine and dandy, we're going to continue on with our skydive. And then obviously if it's not, we could have a couple situations that are called nuisances, like a line twist, and dealing with a line twist, we're going to kick ourselves out of it, kind of like a swing set. And then also we have what's called end cell closers, where we've got our end cells that don't quite open up, and we can fix those with a quick pump of the brakes. And then sliders hung up, we can still do the same thing, pumping down on the brakes. I'm not going to, we're not going to go back and forth to the videos to show you guys what they all look like. The videos are provided there so you can actually take a look at them on your own time. But just make sure that you're aware and remind yourself of what the malfunctions look like versus what a nuisance is. And remember that too many nuisances together can turn into a malfunction. So the big words you're looking for when you're checking your canopy is to make sure it's controllable. That's the word that I like to use, and that is used primarily just to make sure that you can fly that thing safely to the ground. Now there is 2 types of malfunctions or classifications. So we've got high speed malfunctions and low speed malfunctions. High speed defined by like a windy or a noisy malfunction. You may not be able to see a parachute above you. That's why it's called a high speed malfunction, because there could be no parachute above your head. And it usually takes, 20 seconds or less to fall from your parachute opening straight down to the ground if you do not go through with your emergency procedures. And then low speed, it can be windy and noisy as well. You might get a spinning sensation. You may feel dizziness or nausea, and your parachute is not properly or could not be properly inflated above your head. The reason it's called a low speed malfunction is because the canopy may be over your head, but it may not be flying in a controllable manner. The jumper could reach the ground within 2 minutes or less, and you may very likely be seriously injured if you do not assess, think, or react quickly. So just some of the examples that they had out of the PIMS here, slider up, low speed, we're going to pump the brakes. That's going to correct it. It's more like a nuisance. Line twist, like I said, pull the risers apart, kick out. How severe? If you have extreme line twist, it could cause into a high-speed spin. Bag lock, obviously, when your parachute does not come out of the bag, all you see is a black bag above your head. We're going to move to our emergency procedures, and then pilot chute underneath the canopy, so it would be considered a low speed. So keep, fly at half brakes, and emergency procedures if it gets worse. And then a line over can be considered a low speed malfunction. It could cause a spinning. It's definitely probably something you're going to do your emergency procedures on. And then pilot, chute, and tow, you're going to probably do a modified emergency procedure where you may need to pull out your pilot chute still if it's, or knock your bag first. But the big thing to remember is if you're in a high speed malfunction, you do not have very much time. So make sure to get that secondary canopy over your head. And a 2 out. So low speed, keep it, it's usually steerable. Otherwise, you're going to move into your emergency procedures. There is some back and forth between organizations as to what you should keep and what you shouldn't. But for the most part, if you're flying a biplane, do not cut away. Gently pull on the risers for the front of this canopy to steer, or the more dominant canopy. And hands off the toggles. Don't even take the toggles out. So just flying your risers and land into the wind. Do not flare and consider a PLF landing. Side-by-side canopies are stable. Keep them. Control the main canopy. So usually the one that's in front a little bit is a little more dominant, which would normally be your main. And then hands off the toggles completely. You're still just doing minor corrections. Try to land into the wind and consider a PLF landing. And if it's a down plane or a pinwheel, where it's pretty much considered a high-speed malfunction, you're going to consider your emergency procedures and cut away immediately. Going to our emergency procedures, the big thing to remember is when you're practicing these things, also practice a scenario in your mind of why you're going to be doing this. So think of something that's happened, get ready, and then in your practice, you're going to remember hard arch, because the best body position is the body position, you want to have the best body position for when you're opening your reserve canopy, because this is your last chance, your last parachute that you have. So you want to make sure you have a really good hard arch. You're going to look and locate to find your cutaway handle and your reserve handle, because they may have moved. You don't want to blindly grab your harness or your clothing. And then, you're going to reach for the cutaway with one or both hands, depending on your training or your DZ, but I like to have one in each. Pull right, pull left, and then arch again. You're going to hold for the 3 to 5 seconds and then check for your reserve canopy. This information can all be found in page 157 of PIM 2B, if that hasn't changed since last year when I put this all together. And then the big thing to remember is the time checks. So even on your main deployment and on your reserve, you should always be doing a time check. So I think I got this straight out of the PIMs, but so about 4 to 5 seconds approximately for a parachute to open, depending on canopy characteristics. And then 2 seconds after that, they kind of say is approximate for you to recognize if you're in a high speed malfunction. And then two seconds after that is approximate time to perform emergency procedures. And then another 2 to 3 or 4 seconds, approximately for a reserve to deploy. So that's anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds, which is not really a lot of time. So that's why those time awareness checks are actually really good. Every time you pull your parachute out, you should actually start counting. And that's why we teach our students to do that. And so later on in your skydiving career, it's still cool to do it. So that was pretty much the most of, I didn't miss anything. Oh, there was a couple other ones here I kind of missed after line out, broken lines, low speed malfunction, test airworthiness. So you're going to do a control check, make sure you're able to fly it. If it's not controllable, you're going to get rid of it. Broken steering lines, well, that one you're probably going to get rid of sooner than later, depending on if it's controllable, which I assume it will not be. And then a ripped canopy would also be considered either a low or a high speed. So you need to test the airworthiness and perform your emergency procedures if necessary. So a small hole may not cause an issue with the flight, whereas a large gaping hole might be a huge problem. I think I got all that there. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit, there's 2 more things here, but landing off DZ, and it was kind of touched on earlier a bit too. I think it was Pete that was kind of talking about it briefly too, and I think Danny touched on it too. So yeah, like find the closest big field or landing area, and choose there. That's where you want to go, is a nice big field if possible. And when you land there, hopefully safely, stay put. Don't move, because people are coming to find you. A big thing to take into consideration when you're landing off DZ or on DZ, if there's any obstacles around, look away, steer away, and land away. You don't want to land into an obstacle. That being said, follow Danny's rule of making sure that your canopy is level height, so you don't want to actually turn away real close to the ground. But essentially, if you're looking away, steering away, and landing away, you will probably have a better chance of not hitting an obstacle. And then if that doesn't work, then you need to avoid, prepare, and protect. So basically protecting yourself when you're coming into the obstacle, and be ready to essentially, hopefully, protect yourself by balling up or by doing a quick flare if you're landing into the trees, or another area like that. Water landings, so loosen your chest strap. Drop unnecessary gear if possible. So if you have boots and you can get them off, not a bad idea. Do not cut away on a water landing. You're going to want to flare when your feet get close, or just pretty close to the water, or just before they touch, and prepare for a cold water shock, because all Canadian bodies of water are cold. Know the difference between moving water and still water, and get out of your harness and try to swim away from the canopy as soon as possible, and try to avoid getting tangled underneath it. And if you can use your reserve as a flotation device if needed, if you don't have one on you. And then swim to shore immediately if you can. The other thing to remember is swimming on your back is much easier to keep your airway out of the water. So it's one thing to keep in mind, and try to drop as much gear as you possibly can. Trees or power lines, just hang out. Do not try to climb down or mess with the gear, especially if you're on power lines, because those lines, if they're electrically charged, if anyone tries to get you in those lines, are not turned off, you're just putting more people in danger. So the big thing is making sure that the proper authorities are informed and they can turn off and do their procedures appropriately. And then roadways, runways, walkways, I can't remember. You know what? I think Pete had like a whole crazy roadways, runways, walkways. I can't remember how it went. But anyway, the big thing I always say is on any sort of roadway or runway, stop and be aware of any metal moving machines. So if you do land anywhere near a road and your skydive, like Danny was saying, is not over, if you land on a runway, planes are coming in, if you land on a roadway, if you land on a railroad track, look around, be aware, gather your gear and get off of the area you need to get off, but also stay close so that people can find you and make sure that you are okay. The biggest thing to remember in all this stuff is it is a procedural approach, but there is no, there's all these recommendations and all this literature and all this stuff out there, but it is absolutely impossible to have a procedural approach for every, it fits into it, but it's not, for every little situation that comes up. So that's where you will have to use your judgment sometimes. And hopefully we're going to be making good choices and avoiding these situations in the first place. But I think that's really all I had to go on. I know you had more time allotted for me, but anyway.
Awesome. It's okay, Wade, because I think that some of the other ones have been a bit long, but that's okay. This is safety day. It's like the most important Zoom call we'll have been all year. Thank you. I do have a question here from Monica. I don't see your full last name. Oh, awesome. Monica, what's with your McAwesome? I didn't even know. I'm like, I don't know who it is.
Yeah, hi. It's not really so much a question, but I just really wanted to say it because I credit Erica to this tip, and it's on emergency procedures. And I think she mentioned it maybe 2 years ago, and I myself have used it, and I did write it in the chat, but I also want to say it out loud because I think it's really super helpful. Obviously, it applies to only low speed malfunctions, like when you're assessing, or nuisances like line twist, depending on the severity. But it's to keep your altitude awareness. And she said, yell out your altitude. And I have actually used that on more than one skydive. If I'm fighting like really nasty line twists, I'm not spiraling to the ground where I know I just need to cut, but I am fighting and I am losing altitude. It just really makes you conscious and aware when you're yelling your altitude. You're like, okay, 26, and you know how fast you're losing your altitude because you fight, you look, you fight, you look, and then you can know where your hard deck is and if you're approaching it, and if you got to your hard deck, and then you need to do what you got to do. So that was just a really good tip, and I have used it a lot. Well, not a lot because I haven't had that many things, but you know, I have used it and it has been very helpful, and I think it was a really good tip. So
I think it might also help like calm you too, because if you're like, I know I'm okay. I know I'm okay. I'm okay until here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is stress management in those scenarios, and that might help for sure a lot. So.
Oh, sorry.
Wade, I just wanted to say that I've heard you present a lot of this stuff before, but today it seemed a lot more, I don't know, real because you're wearing a collared shirt. So thank you for
I'm still at work. Oh, that's funny.
Paige, I have a question from Paige. I think it was a question from Paige.
That was a hand clap.
Oh, sorry. All right. Yay, hand claps.
Good job, Wade. Good job.
All right. Well, thank you again very much, Wade.